Welcome to The Homeless Conservative, a show about principled politics for exhausted citizens. I'm Blake Fisher, your host, and I'm a political junkie so that you don't have to be. I know you've got lots of things competing for your attention, so let's get to what mattered this week. Did you know that the State of the Union used to just be a letter that the president sent to Congress? Because Article 2, Section 3 requires that the president give to the Congress information of the State of the Union, so it is in his duties to do so. And George Washington and John Adams did so in person, but then Thomas Jefferson was like, nah, and just send a letter. And everyone else did that until 1913, when Woodrow Wilson, of course, it would be Wilson, one of our worst presidents, delivered his message. He delivered it in person in 1913. And so then we got radio eventually, and then we got TV, and then we got primetime TV in 1965 with Johnson, and things have been steadily going downhill since then. So this thing gets worse every year. And this year, I feel like it got specifically very partisan and campaign speechy. It's always going to happen in an election year, but felt especially like that this time. Biden went absolutely full partisan campaign speech on this thing. He mentioned Donald Trump over a dozen times, not by name, but by my predecessor, which normally happens in maybe the first State of the Union a president gives when he's trying to clean up the mess from the previous administration. But we're 3 years into this one. You know, he felt like he needed to adjust Americans' perception that he's a feeble old man. So that was the bar he had to jump over, or kind of shuffle over, I guess, as it were, because he felt like that's a problem. 70-something% of Americans polled think he's too old to do the job for a second term. He's got to change that perception. So you could tell what the goals were. The goals were, I've got to please my progressive base. My goals are, I've got to make the American public think I'm not too old to be the president still. And that was pretty much the extent of his goals. So I'll talk about all the lies and the policy impossibilities he mentioned inside of this hour-long speech. And then we'll move to the other side of the aisle and talk about what the heck that Republican response was. And we'll get into Trump's mental fitness for office as well, because I don't think we've checked in on his mental capabilities. We talk about Biden's a lot, but let's talk about Trump's too. Finally, I'll give you my state of our union, and don't worry, it's just bullet points. It's not an hour-long speech. So let's get into it. So I've got a bunch of clips. I try not to do too much. A lot of this is just your typical complaints from a conservative complaining about a Democrat, especially one that's pandering to the far left of his base. And so I'm gonna have policy differences with them, very obviously. But I thought, well, as my microphone falls down, this is what happens when you're trying to record something live. Anyway, Biden's lies. I think that's a good place to start, because I think it's one thing to have a policy disagreement with Democrats where I say, you know, you all think this is the better way to solve this problem, and I think this is the better way to solve this problem. But when he's spewing lies that are just not true to maybe exacerbate the problem, maybe to make the problem seem bigger than it is, or to make his solution seem better than it is, I'm going to call that out. So the first thing I want to call is just a few of the lies. Another little pro tip, by the way, Biden wants to appear to be young and vibrant. If you watch, I didn't actually get to watch this live. I don't know that many people do, unless you're a political dork like myself, but I listened to it at 1.75 speed on YouTube to just try to get through it a little quicker. And he sounds pretty normal at that speed. So maybe a Biden campaign idea would be pre-record everything and then speed it up. And you're gonna have to slow down when other people talk. I guess I mean, you probably have to actually use the slow down button on YouTube when you listen to me. Sorry that I talk so fast sometimes. There's probably a happy medium that would be good. But yeah, listen to Biden on 1.5, 1.75, and he sounds kind of like a normal, you know, middle-aged person. That's just a little pro tip for you next time you're watching Biden on YouTube, in case you do that in your spare time. But he's promising all sorts of wonderful, expensive programs in this speech, and you'll be happy to know that he can pay for all of it by taxing billionaires and businesses more. Here's the first couple clips.
You know, there are 1,000 billionaires in America. You know what the average federal tax is for those billionaires? No. They're making great sacrifices, 8.2%. That's far less than the vast majority of Americans pay.
That is not true. 8%. This is a ridiculous number. And I really thought it was such a bold lie that I couldn't figure out where he was getting the number from. So let's talk about semantics of taxing. So as you probably know, as a taxpayer, what happens is that you get a paycheck and a certain amount of it gets taken out if you've got that kind of job. There's payroll taxes that people are paying. There's income taxes. We're talking about income taxes because Obviously, there are sales taxes and there's all sorts of other stuff, but the thing that he can control specifically are payroll taxes. I mean, he being the president and Congress can control payroll taxes and income taxes. So he's saying that billionaires are taxed at 8%. Or whatever his 8 point something percent, right? Which I know cannot be true because there is an income tax level of something like the top bracket's like 30 something percent right now. Okay. So I know that those billionaires are at least taking enough of a paycheck or taking enough out in capital gains taxes or whatever. I guess that's sort of a separate version of income tax, capital gains tax, but I know they're getting taxed more than 8%. I just know I've seen the tax brackets. They're getting taxed like 30 something percent. So how is he getting this number? He's getting the number, and these are these economists that I think this is the wrong way to think of stuff. There are a group of people on the left that feel like what they should be able to tax everything that you're worth. Okay. So the federal government used to not even tax income tax. It wasn't until the early 1900s in the 16th Amendment where we get the ability to tax, individuals on their income federally. Okay. There was no such thing as an income tax before that. And since then, there are certain things that the Supreme Court and Congress has said, no, that's not income. So what is income? So it doesn't count. We've decided, this is the law, by the way. This is something Congress can change if they want to, but we've decided that if you have assets, like a house, for example, that's going to be capital gains taxed if you make a profit on that asset that's a house. It's not a job. It's not a paycheck you're getting. So if you buy a house and it's worth $100,000 when you buy it, you pay $100,000 for it. And let's say COVID happens, building prices go up. Now it's worth $200,000, or let's just say actually it's worth $150,000 instead for the sake of easy, not confusing math. You would have not gotten taxed on any of that, right? Because you have not sold the house yet. You just still live in a house that you paid $100,000 for, but the market says it's worth $150,000. There are some liberal people and economists that say we should tax you on the whole $150,000, even though you have not made a penny off of it yet. They want to tax you on that $50,000 bump. You would obviously, if you sold the house, you would have to pay capital gains tax on that $50,000 you made. The capital gains rate has changed, but I don't know what it currently is. I think it's 25% or something. So, or 20% or 15. I don't know. I should know this kind of thing, but obviously I don't make a lot of, I don't pay a lot of taxes on capital gains, clearly. Because I don't have a lot of capital gains. The point is you cannot take billionaires and take everything that they own and then say, we're going to tax you on that total net worth. That's how they're getting an 8%. They are looking at total assets of billionaires and saying, well, they only paid X amount of dollars last year in federal taxes compared to their net worth. But you can't tax net worth. And people want to pay, Elizabeth Warren and some of the very far left want to do these kind of taxes where they could say, it's a billionaire tax. We tax you on everything you're worth or everything. And well, I think it's practically not possible. And two, it's a lie. They're trying to pit the billionaires or the millionaires, all the people, the rich people. They're trying to pit them against everyone else. And it's really great. It's such a populist tactic. And Trump's doing the same thing, by the way. It's Republicans and Democrats. They're doing this now that populism is a thing. And they're trying to get a rise out of the voting class, not the voting class, but the working class people. And they're trying to pit them against people that have more money than them. It's class envy is what it is. But it's a lie. And I'm fine with saying billionaires need to pay more in taxes. If we want to talk about raising their tax rate, that's fine. But they're not paying 8%. They're paying much more than that. Here's another part of that clip going into talking about billionaires. Sorry for the applause. I don't know why I left that in there.
I propose a minimum tax for billionaires of 25%, just 25%. You know what that would raise? That would raise $500 billion over the next 10 years. And imagine what that could do for America.
So again, I'm not really sure what he's talking about here about a 25% tax rate. I assume we're going to see the policy proposals. I've just not read them yet, but I assume what he's going to want to do is tax assets or something like that, not just income. Because if we look at a couple of graphics that I'm going to put up on the screen, if you're watching, and if you're not watching, I'll try to relay as much of the information. Oh, sorry, wrong one. There it is. There's the right thing. Okay, so this is the average federal tax rates by percentile. So if we've got income percentile top 1% over on the right of the chart, they are paying 31.5% of their that's their federal tax rate by the percent, 31.5%. And so they're paying, roughly about a third of their income. And if we look at the right chart, which is talking about average federal rates, and it's kind of going over time back to 1980, if you notice low income has dropped. Low income used to pay about 10% of income taxes in 1980. Now they're upside down. We're actually paying them money. If you are in the lowest income quadrant, you are gaining money from the system. You're not paying in anything, but you're also getting stuff out of it. There's middle income, the black line, if you're viewing this on the right, is also gone down. The high income and the top 1% has gone up and down. It's a little lower than it was in 1980, but it's higher than it was in the early 2000s. And so, the point is, and I don't have the chart up, and I should have gotten it, but the chart that actually shows what the percentage of the tax base is and where it comes from, something like half of the U.S. taxes that they pull in come from the top 15%, I'm pretty sure, of the country. I need to look up that quote. Maybe I'll look that up on the next clip. But basically, most of the taxes are coming from this high earning percentage. And I'm fine with saying, let's have a discussion. What should the tax rate be for the top 1% or the top 5% or top income brackets? We can talk about fudging that if we want to spend that money on other things. That's okay. We can have that discussion, but we can't pretend they're only paying 8%. It's wrong. It's just not true. And you can't make the math add up. He says this proposed 25% tax rate, which what he's trying to do is, I think, tax assets and stuff. So again, don't know what he's talking about there. He's saying it's going to raise $500 billion over the next 10 years. $500 billion, I know that sounds like a lot to you and me, because if I got $500 billion, I'd be set. I wouldn't ever have to do anything again. And I would be, I would be not skimping on the upgrade at Chick-fil-A. I mean, I'm getting the large sweet tea and lemonade every time, like for sure. I'm going to upgrade. I'm going to get that $3 Coke at a restaurant that I hate paying for, even though I love Coke. But I'm going to do it if I've got $500 billion. But for the federal budget, it's not that impressive. That is not even 8% of this year's budget, $500 billion. Budget's like $7.6 trillion. And it's about a third of this year's deficit. So just the money that we're going to spend this year that we don't have, that we're going to have to take out, we're going to have to borrow to pay for this year's budget, $500 billion would not pay for a third of this year's deficit. $500 billion is not an impressive amount of money. And I think that's why he's trying to, that gap is not really 8% versus you're paying 20%. He's really doing some fuzzy math there. So this all sounds really good and it hypes people up. And honestly, it hypes up even more than his base, but it's a lie. Everyone thinks everyone should have to pay their fair share. And I agree. I would like the top 1% to pay their fair share. I'd like the top 5%. I'd like some people in the bottom 40% to pay something. Right now, I think 40% of the country doesn't pay any income taxes. Well, federal income taxes. So, if you want to talk about fair share, if you're paying $0 and 0%, that doesn't seem fair if we're all in this together, right? So let's have this conversation, but we don't have to do it with lies. That just doesn't seem like, it seems like we could have the conversation, but not if it starts like that. So let's go to clip 3 where he's talking about a fair tax code, continuing more lies. Here we go.
A fair tax code is how we invest things to make this country great. Healthcare, education, defense, and so much more. But here's the deal. The last administration enacted a $2 trillion tax cut, overwhelmingly benefit the top 1%, the very wealthy and the biggest corporations, and exploded the federal deficit. They added more to the national debt than any presidential term in American history.
There's a few things there. Some are true, some are kind of half true. So let's just work from the back of it to the front of the clip. So that last part where he talks about Trump adding more to the debt than any presidential term, he's correct because he said presidential term. Technically, Obama and W. Bush spent more than him, added more to the debt, that is, but they had 2 terms. So if you split their terms, obviously Trump was only in office so far for 1 term, and he did add $4.7 trillion to the debt. My problem with this is to pretend that Biden's not on pace to do I have this backwards. Biden has added $4.7 trillion to debt compared to Trump added $8 trillion to the debt, which is a ton of money. Now, to be fair, Trump did have COVID, and that was not like in the plans, right? And we spent way more money than we needed to on COVID, I think, even under Trump. But at least Trump's, I think, can be justified as being necessary, considering, he was the president during the pandemic. Biden came in at the sort of the end. We had the vaccines. We didn't need to do more stimulus. In fact, there's still money that has not been spent of that stimulus. I think that's crazy, right? So even if you took out Trump's $8 trillion, if the $2 that he had to spend on COVID, he still added $6 trillion to the debt. So he's wrong. But I mean, Biden's only $1.3 trillion behind that. So that's, you're both wrong in this case. It's also pretty silly to me that we're saying, again, he's trying to imply that, okay, because we haven't taxed billionaires enough, we could pay for all these different things. But the truth is the middle class has to be taxed if you want this list of pipe dreams that progressives want. The way that the Scandinavian countries have healthcare for everyone and all these things, they tax the middle class really highly. They have decided that it's worth it. They are all willing to pitch in. And like I said before, I think we all need to pitch in. We cannot pay for these things on the backs of just billionaires. We could confiscate all the money and all the assets that every billionaire in the country has. If we could legally do so and just take everything, it would basically pay for not even 9 months of this year's fiscal budget. That's it. That's if you confiscated all of it. And by the way, then what are you going to tax the next year? So let's have an honest conversation about this. But it's, a little funny that he's going to get on Trump for adding so much to the debt when he's had, barely less than he has. So, and let's continue with his fiscal responsibility claims.
I've been delivering real results in fiscally responsible ways. We've already cut the federal deficit. We've already cut the federal deficit over $1 trillion.
Hear people laughing?
I signed the bipartisan deal to cut another $1 trillion in the next decade.
Okay, cutting $1 trillion in the next decade from the deficit. I think it's important to talk about what the difference between the deficit and the debt are, because people get confused. And so let's just level set. The deficit is the amount of money that we spend in a fiscal year that we didn't have in income from taxes and whatnot, right? So this year's budget's like 7.6 trillion. I think we're only going to raise like 6 trillion. And so there's going to be like a $1.5 trillion deficit. That $1.5 trillion gets added to the existing $33 trillion of debt. So by next year, we'll be $34.5 trillion in debt. And this just keeps happening because every year we've been running deficits since the 90s, essentially. I think the last balanced budget was, it was in 2000. It was around there. So, and then from then on, spending has just been astronomical. We spend way more than we pull in taxes. And liberals think that we can just do this for forever. And we've already seen some of the negative consequences of we counted on inflation just never rising, and it has risen. And so we're starting to see some squeeze there. Our debt to GDP, gross domestic product, like how much product and money do we make as a country, all of us individually together, that's becoming a really dangerous, the interest on this debt is becoming more than our GDP. That's a problem. And I think it's going to be catastrophic potentially in the 2030s or beyond if we don't do something about it now. So for him to pretend he's fiscally responsible, for the Republicans to pretend they're fiscally responsible, no one is fiscally responsible. These old people, one benefit to being in your 80s and being the president or in Congress is that you will literally be dead when the checkbook has to be written for this stuff. When we have to pay these debts, it's going to be me and my kids and maybe even my grandkids that are saddled with this. And when you're 85 years old, you're not going to be saddled with it. You'll be dead and gone. Now, your kids and grandkids will, and I guess you don't care about them. But this is all about, let's give you fun things that you like, that voters like, that keep me in Congress or keep me in the presidency or keep us in power. And we all win and we make money. And then we'll be dead by the time something bad happens because of this. And the Democrats and the Republicans are both doing it, but they're pretending they're fiscally responsible. Republicans are terrible at fiscal responsibility now. We have not had a fiscally responsible conservative in since I've been voting age. George W. Bush spent a ton of money. Now, to be fair, 9/11, there was some necessary, obviously, spending there, but he spent a lot of money on just domestic programs too. He spent a lot of money, put us in a lot more debt. Obama did the same thing. Obviously, he's a Democrat. Trump certainly spent money like some sort of cocaine addict in Las Vegas, and which might not be too far off. I don't think he does cocaine, but anyway, the point is, we've not had a fiscally responsible Congress or president on the Republican side for sure, but the Democrats are worse. They would spend all of it if they could. I don't think there's even, for him to pretend he's talking about fiscal responsibility, I think it's crazy. Okay, let's talk about shrinkflation. This is where he's looking out for you guys.
Too many corporations raise prices to pad their profits, charging more and more for less and less. That's why we're cracking down on corporations engaged in price gouging and deceptive pricing, from food to healthcare to housing. In fact, the snack companies think you won't notice if they change the size of the bag and put a hell of a lot fewer, same size bag, put fewer chips in it. No, I'm not joking. It's called shrinkflation. Pass Bobby Casey's bill and stop this.
Okay. The reason I got to bring this one up, because it's kind of a lie. It's also kind of just stupid. If you haven't noticed, the price of things has increased dramatically over the last few years. It's the number 2 thing on voters' mind is inflation and the cost of everything. The first thing is immigration. Those have basically flipped. But the last year, before that, it was the economy, and inflation was the number 1 thing on people's mind. And he's trying to hey, I'm out to bat for you. Here's what really bothers me about this. He's blaming the snack companies or the evil corporations that sell you things at the grocery store. When he caused the inflation, it was his policies and Congress's policies that caused inflation to wildly run out of control. So most economists that I've read, we're going to get into some nerdy stuff here, okay? Most economists think that COVID itself probably would have caused an inflationary period of 4 to 5% over that year or two or whatever, because of the supply and demand issues and the working issues and the manufacturing issues and the global supply chain issues, all the stuff that came along with the pandemic were going to cause too many dollars chasing too few goods, because we were all bored sitting in our homes, and the second we could go spend money, we all spent all this money. We went on vacations, we bought things. There were not enough things. There was more money than there were things. The price of those things then went up because demand was higher for them. Sometimes we didn't have enough of them. So building supplies went up. Everything went up, right? That caused housing to go up. That causes groceries to go up. Gas is a different thing. The reason gas goes up and down is a little different than that. It's more up and down, just volatile. It's a global market. But everything else has just gone this steady increase. And everyone can remember back to 2019 or early 2020 how much that thing they buy right now, 4 years later, cost. And they're like, it was half as much or whatever the situation. It's not really half as much, but call it 9%. 4 or 5% of that would have happened no matter what with COVID. Biden's policies made it more like 8 or 9%. So he almost doubled we would have had inflation. We would have had higher than normal inflation, which is 2 to 3%. It would have been 4 to 5%, and there would have been some pain to go along with it. Biden made it more 8 or 9%, and kind of like the FDR's policies in the Great Depression, it actually extended the problems. You can look at this with the data with red states and blue states. The states that opened up quicker and got people back to work and got the economy running again, they got out of the situation the pandemic put them in faster than the blue states that kept locked down or that, were really restrictive on stuff. The economies opened up quicker, and inflation in some of those states was actually less. Now, inflation's weird because we are in obviously a global economy. It's a national economy. You can't really look at inflation on a state to state level, but you can look at some things like that. And the point is, his policies made it worse, and he's pretending that it's the evil snack companies that are shrinking the size of your stuff. What's really dumb about this is that he doesn't really consider that the alternative for those companies is to raise their prices. So they either have to give you less for the same dollar amount or charge you more for the same amount of physical stuff. And some of these companies have chosen, it's important for us to stay below a price point for our customers. And so we're going to stay below that price point, but that means we're going to have to skimp on something. We're going to have to put less of it in there or whatever. inflation's been a gigantic problem for Joe Biden, and for him to then go after someone for have not raised their prices, but they put less stuff in it is crazy, because the alternative is that they would have raised their prices and it would have been looked worse for you. The president gets too much blame and too much credit for economy stuff. And the truth is, he does own some of this inflation. He absolutely does. And he's pretending that everything he's done has been good for inflation. It has not been. And so don't go after the snack companies. Again, he's trying to vilify business. He's trying to vilify companies. He's trying to vilify corporations because they're evil. Never once have I heard a Democrat give props to a corporation for creating thousands of jobs. The president always loved to take credit for creating jobs. And by creating jobs, he means creating government jobs that aren't really contributing to the economy at all, 0%. But, Snickers, their company does contribute to the economy. So I'm not going to give them crap if they have to shrink the size of the Snickers bar. And I think Snickers actually came out and said they didn't do this. He called them out by name, I think, in the thing, but they didn't. Who knows? We'll let them fight about that. So let's not do this. Like the alternative is higher prices, and they're basically doing you a favor. So maybe don't give them so much crap about it. All right, let's talk about race, of course, because liberals have to bring up race about everything. It's their explanation for all things. Here we go.
But 59 years later, there are forces taking us back in time. Voter suppression, election subversion, unlimited dark money, extreme gerrymandering.
Okay, first of all, there's extreme gerrymandering by Democrats and Republicans. They both do it. Pretending otherwise it's just a lie. Again, it's not actually really true. And then, whose rights are under attack? I think he's specifically talking about some of the voting legislation that happened after 2020. If you don't remember, going back to 2020, a lot of people had to loosen up or chose to loosen up their voting laws because we were still in a pandemic, and it was like, could we do voting by car, more mail-in voting, that kind of stuff. A lot of people loosened those laws. A lot of people then restricted them back after the pandemic because, that makes sense to me. And for some reason, Democrats and Joe Biden himself have called some of these the new Jim Crow, is what Joe Biden specifically called Georgia's voting laws that they passed after 2020. And it should be noted that there are more restrictive voting laws in New York than there are in the Georgia laws. All the Georgia thing did was, get rid of some of the things that happened in the 2020 kind of let's let everything happen. And they have some good laws. I mean, honestly, most of them were hey, we need to verify that you're a citizen of the United States and you are allowed to vote. I think that's totally reasonable. There is nothing racist about saying you have to show me you are who you say you are to come vote. I need to make sure that A, you're supposed to vote here. B, you are who you say you are. C, you are an actual American citizen that is allowed to vote here. You don't have a criminal record where you're not allowed to vote. Pick the thing. You need to be able to prove to us. And by the way, in most states, that's a driver's license or a state-issued ID. In my state that I'm in, I think it's a great system because you can just bring your voter ID card, which costs absolutely nothing and gets mailed to you when you register to vote, which you can do online or in person. And you can bring a social security card as well. So again, a free card. It doesn't have to be an ID. Some people are like, oh, that's racist to make. Why? What? Why can black people not get IDs? I think it's racist to assume that black people can't get an ID. What? It's not any harder for a black person to get an ID or a Mexican person to get an ID or an Asian person to get an ID than it is for a white person to get an ID. How could it be racist to say we want to verify you are allowed to vote and then we'll let you vote? And most states have provisions too, where if you forgot it, you can fill out a provisionary ballot and then prove it later. Or there's all sorts of, we've got 50 different states with a bunch of different counties. There are different systems, but to call Georgia's new laws the new Jim Crow it's race baiting. It's ridiculous. It's pretending there's a bigger problem here than there is really. Are there racist? Absolutely. Are there a bunch of Trump supporters that are racist? Absolutely. Do I think there are also a bunch of racist Democrats? Yeah, totally. I think racism is going to be a problem as long as humans exist. It always has been a problem. It always will be a problem. All we can do is make sure that we don't have laws in our institutions that are allowing that to happen. So I can't change someone's heart, obviously, but I can make sure that a law doesn't say, well, if you're black, you can't vote. Because that's what Jim Crow did. Jim Crow laws were trying to skirt, well, we have to let black people be citizens. We want to make sure they can't vote. So we're going to say you have to pass a test, but we won't make white people take the test. Or we say you have to pay a poll tax. These are Jim Crow laws, and they were actually evil, okay? The laws in the South were actually evil. And by the way, we should mention that most of these states in the South were ran by Democrats. It's just worth mentioning that Republicans freed the slaves and Democrats were continuing to try to figure out how to keep black people out of power and of having their full rights. It's worth mentioning. If you're bringing up 60 years ago, I'm going to bring up 60 years ago. And I think it's fair that if you're saying Republicans are all racist because of these new voting laws, then I'm going to bring up that you were the ones actually doing real Jim Crow back in the day, okay? And to further prove that these laws are not racist, the left tried to do some lawsuits around them in Georgia specifically, and they could not find a single voter who would claim that their rights had been infringed. They could not find one voter that wanted to vote but couldn't for some reason based on one of these laws. They couldn't find one. So it's not happening. And furthermore, if the Republicans are trying to suppress the vote, they are doing a terrible job. The 2020 election and the 2016 election were the highest turnouts in the history of the United States. I know we have more people, but even just percentage-wise, they were. 2024 will probably also be record turnout. If these state laws, and Georgia was the same thing, after their state laws, voting increased, including by minorities. So if they're racist, they're not even working well. So you can't, the data itself proves that these laws are not racist and they are not restricting voting. This is a ploy, and this is further dividing us. And I hate this kind of stuff because I think we have problems. I think we still have race problems in this country. But I do not think they're solved by calling everyone on the other side racist and also calling things racist that are not racist. They're not motivated by race at all. Call racism out when it's actually there and let's solve it. But this is just evil stuff, I think. I think it's anything that is trying to do this sort of good versus evil. And basically, if you're not on our side, you have to be on the other side, which means the other side has to be evil. It's not an argument of ideas. It's that you all have bad intentions. And I'm tired of Joe Biden doing this to everyone. He thinks anyone that disagrees with him has bad intentions. And this is not just a Joe Biden thing. Republicans are doing this too, and the Democrats do this for sure. They vilify the other side, and it's turned into negative polarization. It's the only reason people show up to vote. You don't vote Republican because you like Republican policies. You vote Republican because you hate Democrats, and vice versa. That's what we've gotten down to with voting. And so, it's ridiculous to insinuate that black people or Mexican people or Asian people, pick your race, have different rights in this country than white people. I'm not saying there are not problems, even with our government institutions when it comes to those races and the relations with them. But I'm saying by the letter of the law, it is not true that any race has fewer or greater rights than white people. It's just not true. So stop saying it, okay? At one point, Marjorie Taylor Greene, in all of her asininity and full red MAGA gear, heckles him about Laken Riley, who is the young woman who was murdered by an illegal alien in Alabama. I believe it was Alabama. And so he stops his speech from the teleprompter and he says, and I didn't do the clip from the State of the Union, but I've got a different clip. So he mentions it. He's like, yes, she was killed by an illegal and it should never happen, blah, blah, blah. And it was kind of off script and it went okay. It was fine. Although it's kind of silly that he didn't bring it up. He should have brought it up earlier, I think. How did he not think that some Marjorie Taylor Greene was going to bring this up? I think is a little bit short-sighted to not put this in the speech. But anyway, afterwards, he had to, of course, clean it up because the left, how could you call someone illegal? How dare you? And this is his apology for that.
You used the word illegal when talking about the man who allegedly killed Laken Riley.
An undocumented person. And I shouldn't have used illegal. It's undocumented. And look, when I spoke about the difference between Trump and me, one of the things I talked about on the border was that the way he talks about vermin, the way he talks about these people polluting the blood. I talked about what I'm not going to do, what I won't do. I'm not going to treat any of these people with disrespect. Look, they built the country. The reason our economy is growing. We have to control the border and more orderly flow, but I don't share his view at all.
So you regret using that word?
Yes.
MSNBC. I mean, like, this matters. So you could have made this up in a Republican, like, dream scenario press clipping that we want to be able to say, is that Biden apologizes for calling the alleged murderer an illegal, which, by the way, some of this is legal. Like, these are the legal words we have for things. So it, like, the Constitution says alien when referring to someone from outside the country. So it's a legal word. It's not an insult when we say illegal alien. Illegal alien means you are here and there's no legal reason for you to be here. You didn't apply for a visa. You're not visiting. Like, you know, we have legal definitions for this stuff, and people are like, a person can't be illegal. I'm like, well, legally they can be. So anyway, it's all semantics and silly, and it's silly to me that he, instead of apologizing to, you know, the family of the murder victim, because this is a girl who, the problem, if you haven't heard the story, is specifically that this guy had run-ins with law enforcement in the United States while he was here illegally. One time was he endangering a minor in New York. He had a kid on his scooter without a helmet, a minor, and so he got arrested for that. And I think it was just a ticket, like a misdemeanor. But and the other time he was caught shoplifting. I can't talk today. Caught shoplifting, and the same thing. They just let him go. And there was never any communication between the local police departments and the federal enforcements. So now, some of that would be that because New York's a sanctuary city and refuses to do so. So now there's some bills up with her name, Laken Riley. And by the way, Biden said Lincoln Riley instead of Laken. But anyway, the point is that now they want to fix that system so that if someone is arrested and here under asylum and we know about them, we kick them out. And obviously, we need to have a discussion about that, but it's gross how the Republicans are using this as like, oh, look at this. This is a great story for us. It's gross. A woman died, a 22-year-old nursing student. She died. And I think it's gross how the Republicans use this, but it's also gross that he's apologizing on MSNBC for calling this guy an illegal when that's the definition he is. He's also an alleged murderer. I mean, can we say that about him if he's from Venezuela? I don't know. The point is, I think this was just kind of a gross side tangent maybe to go on, but it shows who he's trying to play to. And he's got a problem with his progressive base. And that brings up a great point next, because we're going to talk about Israel. He really has a problem with Israel, with his progressive base. In Michigan, we had the recent primary where, you know, Dean Phillips, the other guy running in the Democratic primary, is running, but not a chance. But they do have an option, I guess, in Michigan where you can check none of these, essentially. And none of these got like 10% of the vote in Michigan because there's a huge Muslim population in one specific county. And it was sort of their protest vote to say, like, we don't like how America is supporting Israel and not Palestine or the Palestinians in Gaza. And this goes to the fact that, you know, there are some polling problems. 20% of Democrats polled, 20%, that's 1 in 5, side with Hamas over Israel. And yes, I looked at the polling question. It was Hamas in the question. It was not Palestinians. It was, do you side with Hamas? And 20% of Democrats do. So he's got a problem in that a fifth of his party sides with a terrorist organization against Israel. I think that's morally reprehensible, but instead of just calling that out and saying, and maybe trying to explain it, because the other thing I've seen in these polls is that, especially when you talk to young people, like college students, they've never heard any kind of nuanced discussion of the Israel-Palestine situation. They only hear one side of it, and they hear that they're occupiers. It goes back to this oppressor-oppressed thing. Everything on the left has to be viewed through a lens of who's the oppressor and who's the oppressed. That's how they categorize everything. So white people, oppressor; black people, oppressed. Israel, oppressor. You know, Palestinians are the oppressed. Picket. You know, men and women, men oppressor, women oppressed. They have to do this kind of thing with almost everything. At least the very far left progressive side. I'm not saying this is all Democrats. This is the far left progressive wing. And normally though, when you go talk to students that are specifically like just swimming in this, and they really never hear any other information. And there was I think it was a Berkeley University professor that hired a surveying company to actually survey people with this. And the first question was like, hey, do you side with Gaza or with Israel? Or do you think, Israel is genocidal? Do you think, all these questions? And then they would explain some things like, okay, do you think from the river to the sea is an appropriate chant? And they'd say yes. And they'd be like, well, do you understand that that's the entirety of Israel and that would mean that Israel would not exist? And they go, oh, okay. Well, maybe I don't agree with that. So it really just takes some very little explaining sometimes to get people to understand like, oh, this is more nuanced than it is. And I think the president's job, if nothing else, is to be a communicator. Joe Biden is not very good at that. Donald Trump was not very good at that, although at least Donald Trump got in front of cameras more and talked to people more, and they're just hiding him away because they're worried about what he'll say and how old he'll look. Biden should call out that part of his base and say, you're wrong. And he started to do that with this clip, but he didn't really complete it, I don't feel like. So let's go to that clip.
Israel has Israel has a added burden because Hamas hides and operates among the civilian population like cowards under hospitals, daycare centers, and all the like. Israel also has a fundamental responsibility, though, to protect innocent civilians in Gaza. And Israel must do its part. Israel must allow more aid into Gaza to ensure humanitarian workers aren't caught in the crossfire.
All right. There are some mistruths here, and I also just don't like that he tried to kind of call out Hamas, but he did it in such a gentle way. And then he goes, and he does this both sidesism and then talks for longer to Israel than he did to Hamas, who started this whole thing and is a terrorist organization. He spent 51 seconds on Hamas and a minute 15 directly addressing what Israel needs to do. So I'll give him credit for mentioning that Hamas could end this war right this moment if they just surrendered and released the hostages. It would be over. There would be no more innocent Palestinian civilian deaths. There'd be no Israeli deaths. This conflict would be over, and we wouldn't have the humanitarian crisis that we have in the Gaza Strip. But they won't do that. They could do that right now. Israel can't do that because they will continue to be attacked by Hamas. We were in a ceasefire on October 7th when Hamas broke that ceasefire to murder and rape and all sorts of terrible things 1,200 Israelis, none of whom were in the Israeli This is women and children, and it's incredibly gross stuff for anyone to be on the side of them. It's really gross. But okay, to say that he mentions that Israel's doing as well as they can, and I appreciate that he did that, but I hate when people say Israel has the responsibility and then don't follow up with the fact that they are being responsible, because it implies that they're not. And Hamas is, he mentioned it in the speech briefly, Hamas is using human shields, so they hide behind civilians. They hide under hospitals. They do weapons ammunition storage under schools. They dig all these tunnels to keep Hamas in, but they don't let these civilians get into it. They want the civilian deaths because it makes Israel look bad, and the Western press just gobbles it up. We just love to you would think that Israel were the aggressors here, or you would think that they're not letting aid into the country. They're letting more aid in than they ever have. October 7th, they were letting in, I think I did this. Hold on, I've got a graphic for this, I think. Let's see, is this it? Yeah, okay. So since the beginning of the war, and if you're not watching on YouTube or Spotify, I'll try to say most of these things. So since the beginning of the war, 303,000 tons of supplies have come into Gaza. They obviously inspect it as they go in there, but that's 203,000 tons of food, 34,000 tons of shelter, 20,000 mixed, 26,000 tons of water, 18,000 tons of medical supplies, a bunch of fuel, a bunch of cooking fuel, all this kind of stuff. And that's all been let in. They let every single humanitarian thing in once it's been inspected and approved. And I should also mention that they have these corridors where people can go. They are trying to do the best they can to get people out of that to safe places. But the problem is Hamas will tell civilians to not heed their instructions. So they'll try to not, but so what are they supposed to do if you've got a terrorist organization that is willing to let civilians die for A, propaganda, and B, for just shields? What is the other side supposed to do? Just give up? It's a terrible, terrible situation. But Hamas is the only people that can end this. And most people even think that Hamas walked away from the current negotiations because they want there to be killing of people during Ramadan, because they don't want a 6-week ceasefire because they don't get pressed then. Then all the pressure would be on them to release the hostages. Look, we did a ceasefire. Why won't you release the hostages? I just think the apologizing for Hamas is gross. And it mostly happens on the left. It's definitely a problem on the left, although it's starting to happen on the right too, because obviously you got some neo-Nazi BS going on in the right, but there's clearly way more anti-Semitism on the left than we really thought. I mean, look at the college campus stuff. And I just don't like that he spent more time barking at Israel than he did about Hamas. He could have just talked about Hamas. He did not need to talk about Israel, but it's playing to his base. And I think that's gross because it's not the right thing to do right now. Don't get onto Israel. Like Israel, I'm not saying they're perfect. I'm not saying their leadership perfect. I'm not saying they've executed this war perfectly. I'm saying they are doing a lot that doesn't get the press. No one talks about that they let all the trucks in. There's more trucks than there ever have been going into Gaza. Yes, unfortunately, it's a war. War sucks. And I wish it didn't exist. But again, it will always exist as long as humans exist, because humans have the capacity for evil, and Hamas is evil, and they killed innocent civilians going into this thing. I've talked about this before. My point is, like, Joe Biden should be leading on this. It's a broadly popular thing. I mean, let's just get into the like political part of it. 67% of the country thinks that there should be no ceasefire unless Hamas surrenders and gives up the hostages. So 67% of the country feels like they're with Israel. And you're pandering to this small percentage. I mean, at best, it's 20% of your party, so that they come vote for you in November. I don't really believe those people are going to vote for Donald Trump. It's not like Donald Trump, some champion of the Palestinian people, right? They think he's going to do a Muslim ban. That's the popular thing that everyone's going to claim, which he did call it a Muslim ban, to be fair, but it was a ban of people coming into our country from specific countries harboring terrorists. That's a fine policy. Don't call it a Muslim ban and be an idiot. It has nothing to do with the religion. It's the country they came from. But that's what Trump said, because it's kind of what he means, because he's an a-hole, all right? And he's probably racist, for sure. I mean, I think you can't call it a Muslim ban and not be a little bit, I don't know if that's racist or religionist or whatever we'd call that. But let's just not pretend that Israel's not aiding these people, okay? And imagine that 67% would be higher if the media was better about covering this. I still think the media is not doing a good job at covering this war. Just don't think they are. And all right, so then let's go on to some other stuff. I don't have clips for this stuff because honestly, it just really didn't matter enough, because this we kind of moved on from the lies to just the list of dreams that he wants to do. He kind of listed out all this stuff like, I want to do this, I want to do this, I want to do this. And it's just a list of liberal, like just playing to the base, which is fine. I get that in a campaign speech, but it's not actually the State of the Union. It's your dream list of things you want to do in the Union. I'm really actually more okay with the patting on the back part of the State of the Union than I am the like, here's what I want to do, because that gets into campaign speechy. It has nothing to do with telling the Congress what's going on and the American people what's going on. And so I really don't like this part, but I'm just going to list off some things that he thinks he's going to do. He's going to do price controls for pharmaceuticals. He's going to do price controls for building and housing and stuff. I don't know how that's going to work. I think price controls are a terrible idea economically. They never work. They always cause economic problems, but he wants to do it. I think it's foolish, but that's what he wants to do. He also wants to, cut the deficit. He keeps bragging about cutting the deficit, but he's not really like, he's not decreased the deficit, other than his one little trick of he took the spending we spent during COVID, the emergency spending, which was not normal budget, that was extra budgetary, and then compared his next year, his first year in office, to that number and said, look, I cut $1 trillion off the deficit. No, you didn't have the COVID emergency. That's not the same thing. He wants to build more affordable homes. Don't know how didn't say how he's going to do it. He wants to make college more affordable, which is laughable because he wants to forgive all this student debt, but not once have I heard even one plan or one thing he would do to make college more affordable. The truth is, forgiving all that student debt would make college continue to rise in cost, because why would the colleges ever change their pricing? They get all this money from the federal government. The students never have to pay it back. Why would they not just keep jacking up the price? That's what they've been doing for 30 years. Government gets involved in things, the price goes up. That's medical stuff, that's college education, that's housing markets. Prices go up in things that the government gets involved in, especially the federal government. I would suggest not doing so, but he wants to make it more affordable without any real plan, and his policies actually making it less affordable. He wants billionaires to pay their fair share, whatever the heck that means. He wants to solve shrinkflation. He wants to put charging stations everywhere for every car to be electric, even though we don't have the power grid to support that right now. We could not have all electric cars right now. Our power grid would crumble, okay? He wants teacher raises for everyone. Federal government doesn't pay for teacher salaries. The state governments do. This is all stuff that he's just spouting out. And people go, yeah, I want that too. Yeah, I would love for things to cost less. I would like teachers to be paid more. I would like college to be more affordable. These are not jobs that the president's supposed to do. And so we don't need him in the State of the Union. I wish he wouldn't have done it. So, overall, my analysis of his State of the Union, I think he did what he needed to. The very, very low bar of not looking too old to be president. Now, I still think he's too old to be president. You don't impress me that much by reading off a teleprompter, but I think he did what he needed to as far as he did a good enough performance that I think people will go, look at the State of the Union performance. The problem is he's going to have to do that over and over and over again on a campaign trail. I don't think that I very much doubt. This would be my prediction. I should keep a prediction spreadsheet somewhere. And then when I make one, go back. And once that happens or doesn't happen, I give myself some sort of score on how accurate my predictions are. Because I think most people make predictions. And the truth is no one knows what's going to happen next, right? But here's my prediction. I'm going to be foolish anyway. I'm going to guess that by November, the polls don't show really much of a change. I would say that there's not even a 5% change on the question, is Biden too old to have a second term? I don't think there'll be a 5% swing either. Certainly not to the direction of, no, he seems fine. I think that the more we see him, the more we're going to see that he's old and our eyes are not lying to us. I think that number only increases from now to November if he's out in front of people, because he just can't perform at this level all the time. He did really well. He was out in the crowd beforehand and after. He had a few flubs. One of my clips had him kind of messing up and he coughed all the time. And he certainly spoke kind of strangely, like he was kind of yelling and seemed angry, which I think they told him to do. He kind of seemed tough. And I think he passed that test for most Americans. It's not convincing me, but he seemed more with it than normal. But like I said, how hard is it to read off of a teleprompter? I'm doing it right now. I'm not reading. I have my bullet points or whatever, but it's not that hard, especially if you have months to practice. They start writing this thing 6 months in advance. So I would hope that he could deliver the State of the Union address perfectly. But will he be able to go to Michigan next month for some rally and off the cuff answer questions from voters? I don't know. And maybe they won't do that. But the more they try to control him, the more the narrative of he's too old and he's not really in charge, other people are in charge, is going to take hold. If he goes out there though, he's going to look old. So they've got, it's the worst of catch-22s, but do you know what he could do? He could just resign. He could say, I'm not going to run again. He could do the right thing and step down, like he sort of implied that he would 4 years ago. The Democrats deserve someone better than him, and Republicans deserve someone better than Trump. Neither one of those guys are going to go away on their own, though. So unless one of them has a major health scare or one of them dies in the next few months, those are going to be our nominees. And, good luck, Biden. Good luck, Biden's people trying to figure out what to do with them. Do you hide them? Do you show them? I don't know. Good luck. I don't love the playing to the base, though. I really hate the partisan stuff. I hate the cheap shots. I'm fine with taking the real shots. Like the shots at Republicans for not passing the border stuff, I think was totally fair. I didn't do anything in the border because I just talked about the border 2 weeks ago or whatever, so I didn't feel like you wanted to hear about it again. But, Biden should have owned more of his problem. For Biden to pretend that he doesn't have anything to do with the border and it's all Republicans' fault, I don't think is right or fair, but I would put that in the realm of normal politics. But Republicans screwed up. They could have passed this bill. They chose not to because Donald Trump told them not to, because they want this to be an issue for the rest of the year. I think that's fair hitting, but I don't like how many times he mentioned his predecessor. I don't like that he did all this patting on the back of stuff that didn't really happen. And then I don't like that he just made all these promises, not really promises. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. Here's what I want to do. But without any plans. That's not the state of our union. And that's why I wish this speech would go away, because I think it's turning into, it was a partisan campaign speech. And that's kind of gross to me to do in that building. I think that we shouldn't do that. So, we should talk about the Republicans a little bit, because if you don't know, there's also a response that the parties do. And they chose freshman Senator Katie Britt, and it was the most cringy thing I've ever seen in my life. I could not believe it was real. Normally they pick some sort of up and comer, and I feel like this becomes kind of the Madden curse, where whoever's on the cover ends up not having the career that we thought they were going to have. Pickett, the team ends up being bad. And I think that's the Madden curse. I think this has also been a thing. Sports Illustrated was another thing. I think there was sort of a curse that went along with that. If you got the cover of it and then bad things happen to you. So I think there's now something like that with the response to the State of the Union, because it's always these up and comers that kind of disappear. Remember Bobby Jindal? I haven't heard of that guy in a long time. But anyway, Katie Britt decides to take this script on and really try, apparently, in case the Senate thing doesn't work out, go for days of our lives. I think that's what she's going for here. We'll see what you think.
Meanwhile, the Chinese Communist Party is undercutting America's workers. China is buying up our farmland, spying on our military installations, and spreading propaganda through the likes of TikTok.
That's all true.
See, the CCP knows that if it conquers the minds of our next generation, it conquers America.
I don't know why she's being so dramatic. This isn't even the most dramatic part. I just picked this clip because it segues really nicely to the next thing I want to talk about. She read the whole thing like it was a soap opera. It was so bizarre. Most of the context was okay. She's getting some flack now for, she told this story about this girl that was trafficked and raped by these immigrants and whatever. Like, it was an old story from decades ago, and it has nothing to do with Biden. And it really, I could deal without that stuff for sure. But for the most part, if you read this transcript, and I'm really glad I watched it and didn't just read the transcript. I thought about just reading it, because the context is not there. I don't know why she read it this way, but it is bizarre. There's a Saturday Night Live sketch this week with Scarlett Johansson doing it. I mean, it's bizarre. And I don't know, Nick Cataggio put it best, aka All Up on It at the Dispatch. He said something along the line. Let's see if I can find it, because it's too freaking perfect. And now I got to find it. Let's see. Oh yeah. He said, then came Senator Katie Britt to deliver the Republican rebuttal to Biden's speech. Of her performance, the less said, the better. Watching it, I found myself wondering whether she had seized the opportunity to deliberately sabotage her chances of becoming Donald Trump's running mate, mindful of how close the last guy who held that position came to being murdered. And I think maybe that's what's going on. Maybe she doesn't want that job. And so she was like, I'm out of here. I'm going to overplay that. I don't know. Maybe I'm overthinking it. But I'm glad she brought up TikTok in that clip, because that gives me a great opportunity to talk about why Trump does this all the time, the Republicans. And I don't understand how they haven't figured this out yet. So there's this rule, and I don't know if we have a name for this rule yet, but Trump says something. Here's my opinion. Here's my position on this. Everyone has to follow suit, because you can't disagree with Trump, right? And then you record the response to the State of the Union. You call out TikTok and China, and everything she said right there was absolutely true. Now, she said it in the weirdest, most dramatic way possible that was totally distracting me from the words she was saying, because all I could do was look at her face and why is she talking so slow? I did the math, because I just had to. I did the math on if I talk at my speed, which we've admitted is fast. And by the way, I can also do her speech at 1.75 and it sounds normal. It's kind of weird. It's not because she's old. It's because she's being so dramatic, just like Biden. But I did the math, and what I figured out was that I could have read that speech in 9 minutes, and it took her 18 minutes. Now, that's not me going fast. That's just my normal, when I do these kind of videos, like when I record a short, I recorded that speech level or speed and then applied it to her speech, and her 18-minute speech I could have done in 9 as a Instagram or YouTube video. Anyway, I thought it was kind of funny, not necessary or to know necessarily. So sorry about that random tidbit of information, but there is this rule that generally it's like the second you go to that position, publicly, especially. So you plan a press conference or you do the response to the State of the Union. Trump the next day or so comes out with the opposite position, and now you look like an idiot. And so Trump did this with TikTok. Trump, who was the original person trying to ban TikTok, his executive orders that did so for government employees, for example. So government employees can't be. Most states have now changed it where their government employees cannot have TikTok on their phones because there is a real privacy concern, and there is a concern with China manipulating who can see what. China has gone after journalists, for example. It's used TikTok data to find journalists. It's used it to track down Chinese dissidents that are in America that are speaking out against China. So this is a real thing that's happening. This is not and we can talk about if TikTok should be banned or not, but the point is Trump was for a TikTok ban until this week when he wasn't. This is him on CNBC. The clip is kind of long, but the reason I want to bring it up is twofold. One, listen to what Trump is saying and tell me if you can make any sense at all. And the second reason is just to illustrate this point that he doesn't have any principles or policies. He just changes on a whim. We'll talk about why he changes in a moment, but here's the clip.
You have called TikTok a national security threat. At one point, you said that their, quote, data collection threatens to allow the Chinese Communist Party access to Americans' personal and proprietary information. And yet it appears that you've now reversed your view on banning TikTok. Why is that? So I had it done. And then Congress said, well, they ultimately usually fail. They are extremely political, and they're extremely subject to people called lobbyists who happen to be very, very talented, very good, and very rich. I could have banned TikTok. I had it banned just about. I could have gotten it done. But I said, you know what? But I'll leave it up to you. I didn't push them too hard because, let them do their own research and development. And they decided not to do it. But as you know, I was at the point where I could have gotten it done if I wanted to. I sort of said, you guys decide. You make that decision because it's a tough decision to make. Frankly, there are a lot of people on TikTok that love it. There are a lot of young kids on TikTok who will go crazy without it. There are a lot of users. There's, a lot of good, and there's a lot of bad with TikTok. But the thing I don't like is that without TikTok, you can make Facebook bigger. And I consider Facebook to be an enemy of the people, along with a lot of the media. What Facebook did with lockboxes, with a $500 million...
Does this guy sound like the President of the United States? Or does he sound like your crazy uncle?
I mean, I consider it illegal, but, they put people in jail when they spend... They put people in jail when they spend more than $5,600 in a campaign. They go to jail if they're $200. Look at Dinesh D'Souza. Right. They put him in jail over a couple of $100. And yet here's a guy spends $500 million and he doesn't go to jail.
Mr. President, though, is TikTok, but do you believe that TikTok is a national security threat or not? Because if it is, and I believe that the emergency powers order that you had put in place at the time suggested that it was that not true?
I do believe that. I do believe it, and we have to very much go into privacy and make sure that we are protecting the American people's privacy and data rights. And I agree, but, we also have that problem you have that problem with Facebook and lots of other companies, too. I mean, they get the information, they get plenty of information, and they deal with China, and they'll do whatever China wants. If you look at some of our American companies, when you talk about... highly sophisticated companies that you think are American, they're not so American. They deal in China, and if China wants anything from them, they will give it. So that's a national security risk also. But when I look at it, I'm not looking to make Facebook double the size. And if you ban TikTok...
Okay, I'm done with that. The point is, he clearly has no idea what he's talking about. He never answers why. So he says TikTok is a national security threat, but he doesn't want to ban it because Facebook will then make more money, and he hates Facebook, and he claims Facebook is doing this stuff too. Facebook's not in China. Facebook doesn't give the Chinese Communist Party user data. Facebook doesn't get... I don't like Facebook. I'm not defending Facebook. I am saying that, comparing TikTok and Facebook are two different things. Yeah, when you're talking about user privacy, yeah, maybe that's one thing. But is there a government party that's controlling that information that's getting to you? I don't like the way Facebook manipulated who could see what. I don't like the way Twitter did that. I don't like the way any of these social media companies have like shadow banned people and stuff. But that's not the same thing. That's a different conversation, and they're private companies. It's not the same thing as saying a government controlled app that our kids are using. And he never answers the question. So there's only two explanations for this. First of all, he's a rambling idiot. If you think that guy's smart enough to be the president again, then I don't like to name call in here. I think you are lying to yourself or you're dumb. There's only two. That's it. If you think that was smart, if you think what he just said was intelligent, and you think that guy can run the country, you think that guy can be the president of the United States, then I think you are either lying to yourself because you have this weird loyalty to him and I don't understand that. Please explain it to me. Or you're an idiot yourself. Those are the only two explanations, because that I am not confident with the person that I cut it off. There was still a minute and a half of him talking about TikTok and Facebook and Zuckerberg or whatever, it was weird. Okay, so that's him talking about TikTok. And the truth is, the only reason he flipped is because either he hates Facebook so much, he doesn't want to give them a win, which is not putting national security at the top. So he does not care about you. When people are like, he's the only one that will fight for us, you're full of it. He doesn't care about you. He only cares about himself. And he cares more about either his vindictive relationship to Facebook because they kicked him off his platform, or he cares about national security. He does not seem to actually want to put the national security interest ahead of his interest of spiting Facebook. The other option is that he's gotten cozy with a donor who owns part of the parent company that owns TikTok. Do you think that might have something to do with it? That he needs money and he needs campaign money? I think it would. It's funny that he mentioned lobbyist, and here's someone he's going to take money with that is certainly against a TikTok ban because he owns the company he owns part of the stock that owns TikTok. I think that's a bigger issue. He will sell you out immediately for anything, whether it's just his own vindictiveness or for money or whatever. He does not care about you. He does not care about America. He does not care about our national security. If we elect this guy again, we are idiots. And here's him talking about Social Security, by the way. If you want to talk about another thing that we actually need and we don't have is Social Security reform, and Biden won't touch it. Trump won't touch it, but they both claim the other were. But I only want to bring this up because listen to him talk about Social Security. It's even worse than the TikTok clip.
Your outlook on how to handle entitlements, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, Mr. President, it seems like something has to be done, or else we're going to be stuck at 120% of debt to GDP forever.
So first of all, there is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting, and in terms of also the theft and the bad management of entitlements, tremendous bad management of entitlements. There's tremendous amounts of things and numbers of things you can do.
It's not really how entitlements work.
I don't necessarily agree with the statement. I know that they're going to end up weakening Social Security because the country is weak. I mean, you take a look at outside of the stock market, what we're going through hell. People are going through hell. They have, and I believe the number is 50%. They say 32 and 33%. I believe we have a cumulative inflation of over 50%. That means people are, they have to make more than 50% more over a fairly short period of time to stay up. They've gotten routed. The middle class in our country has been routed. And the middle class
there's no inflation of 50%.
I
don't know what he's talking about there.
And they have
no one knows what number he's talking about.
Very
just made it
badly
up.
with policy. When I was president, I was doing a job. We were going to start to pay off debt. We would drill, baby, drill. We were producing oil, but we were going at a much higher level.
Again,
oil and gas.
Trump
we were
added
doing, we were
$1 trillion
third
to the debt.
when I started.
Not cutting debt ever.
And when I ended, we were
COVID.
won by a long shot, and we were very close. We were energy independent. We were very close to becoming energy dominant, Joe. We were going to be dominant, so dominant.
Remember, the question was about Social Security.
What Saudi Arabia and Russia were doing. And we
I'm
were
ADD,
on that path.
Goodness.
We were going to be paying down debt. We were doing a lot of things, and then we got hit with COVID. We did a fantastic job with COVID, but nobody wins with COVID. I guess China found that out because they ultimately got hit very hard also. But nobody wins with COVID, and so we had to do other things. We had to help if I didn't do the expenditures, if we didn't do the kinds of things we did for the economy, we would have had a 1929 type depression.
There's a minute
and
left.
I had
of
to
this
stay
rant.
out in front of it, and we did a great job on that. And we did with all of the things, coming up with Regeneron and doing so much else, getting all, because, we had empty, when I came in, we had empty, I call them empty cupboards. We had empty shelves. We didn't have equipment. We didn't have the gowns. We didn't have the ventilators. We didn't have anything. This country wasn't prepared for a thing like that. And I'm not even blaming anybody in that, because, when it came, nobody thought a pandemic would ever happen again. It sounds like an ancient problem, not a problem that you'd have in at the time, a very modern age. It was like an ancient thing. Who would ever? So I'm not blaming anybody for that. But we had empty cupboards, and I got them stocked, and I got them stocked fast. And we did a great job with it. Never got credit. I got credit for the greatest economy. I got credit for foreign policy. I got credit for knocking out ISIS and not going into wars.
Right.
But we beat ISIS. But I never got the credit for having done a great job with that.
Mr. President,
someday, I think history will give us.
Okay, he never talks about Social Security in that whole 4-minute rant. He never talks about it. He says up front that there's lots of things we can do with it. If you notice, he always says we've got lots of things we can do. This guy is not mentally capable of being the president again. I wouldn't trust him to watch my children. I wouldn't trust him with a stove. This guy, and to be fair, Biden's on a teleprompter, and Biden could not do this either. I'm confident, but. What's the excuse? You're on the phone. You could have a computer in front of you. You could Google this thing. You could ChatGPT it and read what it says back, and it would be better than that nonsense. If you think this guy can be the president again, you are either lying to yourself or you're an idiot yourself. That's it. There is no other explanation, and I'm not going to try to pretend that there is one anymore. People are like, oh, the media, deceptive editing, or they're lying, or blah, blah, blah. That was 4 minutes straight of Trump rambling. It was more than that, because with the TikTok thing, it's 7 minutes of him rambling about incoherently with made up numbers. And these aren't just lies. Where does he think inflation? I think inflation is more like cumulative 50% inflation. Based on what? What cost 50% more than it did? What cost $10 4 years ago that cost $15 now? I'm sure there are a few things, but that's not how we measure inflation. And he doesn't know what he's talking about. No one knows what he's talking about. So, my State of the Union it's bad. Okay. We've got Trump in one corner and Biden in the other one. And we've got a lot of problems, and neither one of them or their parties are really talking about real solutions. We've got $33 trillion in debt. We've got 7 million encounters at the border under Biden. We've got immigration problems. We've got China and Russia and Iran, who are obviously would love to wipe us off the map. We've got education, the post-2020 learning loss. Our education system was already bad. We've got a bunch of education problems. We've got higher education problems. We've got college tuition. We've got affordable housing. We've got a lot of problems. Now, that being said, this country is still great. I love this country. It's still the best country in the world. I realize whatever we can measure, you can't measure that thing, but it really is. That's why people come here. That's why people are flooding across the southern border. That's why people immigrate here all the time legally. That's why people want to work here. That's why they want to start businesses here. That's why all the tech innovation and medical innovation happens in this country. It's a great country, but we have a lot of problems that we're not talking about, and they're going to be really big problems. These aren't little problems. These are potentially really big problems. China, Russia, Iran, that could turn into World War III. That's a real big problem. We need to have someone that can carefully weigh the options and what to do. We do not need either one of these blowhards in there with their tempers, and Joe Biden loves to prove that he's a man, and Trump likes to do the same thing. I don't trust either one of these guys with the nuclear code. So that's my State of the Union. I think we've got lots of problems and no one to lead us through it, because not only are the presidents terrible, the good Republican senators or Republican House members, or really even Democrats, they're leaving. The ones that are taking their job seriously, they're just leaving. They're saying this place is dysfunctional. Nothing's happening. Everyone would rather be on TV than actually legislate. And they're not wrong. So the whole Congress is filled with these idiots, and they're not going to solve these problems because the adults are leaving. And that's the State of the Union. We need to elect better leaders, but that's us. That's on voters. That's on you and me. That's on you electing good people in primaries. That's on you then voting for the right person. And that's not, we can't keep doing this thing where we just choose the lesser of two evils. Most people are going to come home to the party they most closely identify with in November. Republicans, even if they voted for Nikki Haley or say they hate Trump, they will come around and they will vote for Trump, most of them, because they hate Biden so much or they're so scared of Biden. And to be fair, that's going to be the whole campaign you hear for the next several months. All you're going to hear about from Republicans is how evil and how Democrats will destroy the country. And you're going to hear the same thing from the left about Trump. Now, I think they have some points with Trump because he already tried to stage a coup one time. We had January 6th. So, there's that. But I also think that we're blowing things sometimes out of proportion. And when the only reason to vote for someone is because you're voting against someone else, that's just a recipe for really bad politics. And we've got to do better than that. We need to actually vote for people that we think can solve our problems, not just vote for them because they're not the other guy that we're more scared of. And Democrats are going to make you think that half the country is racist so that you can vote for them. Republicans are going to make you think half the country wants open borders and they're going to have trans people reading to your kids at the library. And that's how they're going to scare you to vote for them. But none of them are actually offering real solutions. None of them are offering real policy positions. I mean, Biden is in the Democrats a little bit more than Republicans, but the Republicans do not have a policy platform. The policy platform is, what does Trump believe? That's what I believe. What does Trump say? That's what I say. Even if Katie Britt's going to have to say the opposite about TikTok tomorrow. We should stop falling for this. It's really bad. So, that is my hunky-dory State of the Union. I'm sure that leaves your spirits very high. Thanks for joining me on today's episode of The Homeless Conservative. I know your time's valuable, as I've said, and I'm grateful that you choose to spend some of it here. If you like what you hear, please consider rating the podcast or sharing it with a friend or liking it on YouTube, rating it on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. It really does help. And this conversation does not have to be one-sided. I love to hear from you, so feel free to reach out on Instagram or YouTube at The Homeless Conservative or on Facebook. And you can also send me an email at blake@thehomelessconservative.com. Your input really does mean a lot. I appreciate it, and I will talk to you next time.